We are going to start. It is 1:41. I just want to be mindful of time, but also allow folks to make their way this way. Few changes to the program. I do not believe we will be joined by Councilwoman Quiñones-Sánchez from Philadelphia. I believe she was unable to attend today. And Lydia, Valencia, the President and CEO of the Puerto Rican Congress of New Jersey, I believe may or may not be here today. I'm not quite sure, but I do know Sanchez excused herself. So I just want to point that out. My name is Joe Rodriguez. I am the Deputy State Director for the Office of United States Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. I oversee the Senator's 2 district offices, one in Hartford, Connecticut, and one in Bridgeport. We have a staff size of 15 in Connecticut and 35 in Washington. So I am your moderator for this panel, which, as you know, is engaging elected officials. I am honored to be joined by 2 gentlemen who are quite active in their respective states. The first, we'll start since we're in his home state. Assemblyman Crespo is the chair of the Assembly of Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force, New York State Assembly from Albany. Let's welcome Marcos Crespo, everyone. We also are joined by State Representative Rene Coach P. Plasencia, a member of the Florida House of Representatives. Let's welcome the representative today. So as you all know, today's summit is a bit unique. It's different from the past diasporas that we have had in New York, in Washington. And it's different because today's focus and tomorrow's focus is Rebuild Puerto Rico, which seeks to facilitate connections, collaboration of Puerto Rico's civic sector and Puerto Rican diaspora who want to join efforts to contribute to the rebuilding of Puerto Rico. One angle of this, and I know for some of you in the audience, you attended the policy panel, which occurred just before lunch in the same room. Engaging our elected officials is quite important in the overall organizing of the diaspora and rebuilding Puerto Rico. So I discussed policy, what's happening in Washington and in districts across the country. It's also important to discuss ways to engage elected officials. A colleague of mine who participated in the panel earlier today, and I'm using her words, stated, we cannot engage in transactional, right? She's here, is she here? Here she is. We cannot have a transactional relationship with our officials. We have to build relationships with our elected officials for the greater cause. So I'm hoping to touch upon some of that, how we engage elected officials, how we can establish a relationship for the betterment of not only the Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico and efforts to rebuild, but as well as the Puerto Ricans who migrated to the States. And we have 2 men who, again, are elected officials with a rather large Puerto Rican population within their respective districts. So I'll stop there. I'm looking forward to engaging this conversation. And with that, I will ask from New York, Assemblyman Marcos Crespo to once again introduce himself and briefly touch upon some of the efforts here in New York related to rebuilding Puerto Rico.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate everybody coming out. Great turnout. And to our Centro and to Professor Melendez and the team for putting this important conference together more timely than ever. First, so you should know about me, I was born in Puerto Rico, raised all over Peru, where my dad's from, New York City, lived in Florida for a bit, different places. But the Bronx is home, and the Bronx is otro pueblo de Puerto Rico. Historically has been, continues to be. But obviously, in the legislature, I chair the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force, which for 30 years has existed as a vehicle for a voice, giving voice to issues of impacting the Latino community. I also chair the Democratic Party in the borough of the Bronx, where many, if not most, of the elected officials who are of Puerto Rican descent serve in politics today. One of them is joining us here, State Senator Gustavo Rivera, who's with us as well. And so there's a lot of tie-in for me on a personal level and professionally in terms of everything that's happening in Puerto Rico. And when the storm hit, I was blessed with the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico that Friday. The storm hit Wednesday. On Friday, Governor Cuomo organized a relief flight with just myself, Lydia Velasquez, a group of professionals from several of the authorities in the state that could be helpful, particularly in the power and energy sector, and supplies and relief efforts and National Guardsmen. And we went out there in that first flight in to sort of bring some of those supplies, bring some of that relief. But what I felt was more important was to bring attention to the need and to the cause. It was unfortunate that the governor of the state of New York could arrive in Puerto Rico 2 days after the storm, but it took the federal government, it took the president of the United States several weeks. And I think it just speaks to the issues. In New York State, we have launched a relief and recovery effort. We have, which I co-chair. We have sent, I can't tell you how many hundreds of thousands of pounds of materials and supplies. New Yorkers came out in tremendous numbers to collect goods. The governor and I had a conversation on that flight returning from Puerto Rico that Friday about what do we do next. And what we discussed was the need to help facilitate the transport of all of those goods. It was one thing to collect things in the neighborhood, but how do you get it there, especially in the midst of all of the issues? And so the governor did an incredible job of securing commitments from several of the airlines and other facilities, including a maritime ship out of SUNY that has done several trips bringing those supplies in. We have also been committed to Puerto Rico even before the storm, when our Medicaid and state health department went out to partner with Puerto Rico to deal with Medicaid parity and issues around the healthcare industry. We've done that with the agricultural industry. 3 years ago, during one of our conferences, we opened a New York office in San Juan that was working with Puerto Rico businesses to help them get into the New York market. So there was a lot of these efforts that were born out of that natural relationship between New York and Puerto Rico, and they have only intensified after the storm. The last thing we just recently did was launching a phase 2 of our New York State recovery effort, which involves bringing 500 students from SUNY and CUNY to go do volunteer work with several nonprofits on the ground, but also commitments from several of the trade unions to go out there to bring personnel that can not only train folks on the ground on how to best do repairs, but to physically go out there and help families improve the condition of their homes so they can get back into their homes as much as possible, or be in a better position to be resilient to the next season. So there's a lot more, but I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure in the dialogue we'll elaborate on these issues. But there's been a great outpouring of support, I think, from the nonprofit sector, government, and just community that has come out for Puerto Rico all over the state, and I couldn't be more proud of the state of New York in what we've been able to do so far.
May I have the
Executive privilege?
Sure, I'm not saying no to Dr. Melendez.
May I? We have Senator Gustavo Rivera with us, and I think it would be a great idea if during the time is the representative of New York, and it's in the Senate for those of you who don't know him. So please.
I didn't mean to presume.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Representative, do you prefer Coach P? I see Coach P here.
Rene or Plasencia.
Coach P, Representative Plasencia from the House of Representatives in the state of Florida.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today as well. What's happened in Florida is very similar to what's happened here in Puerto Rico, in New York. But I'll give you my background for just a second before I dive into that. My name is Rene Plasencia. I was born in Orlando. My mother was born in Puerto Rico. She moved to the Bronx when she was 9, and then eventually came to Florida where she had me. So my mother was part of that first wave of Puerto Ricans who came here in the early 1940s to New York, into the Northeast, which I think is interesting. As her son, now this next wave of Puerto Ricans have been coming down to Florida, not just from Puerto Rico, but from the Northeast as well, where we have so many Puerto Ricans from the Northeast and from all over the U.S. and from Puerto Rico moving every day, even prior to Maria, to the state of Florida and predominantly to the Central Florida region. I was a high school teacher before I got elected 4 years ago to serve in the Florida House. And I taught all 15 years at Colonial High School, which is, well, when I first started there, was the only minority Latino high school in Orange County. Now there's, I think, 2 or 3 more, all on the east side of Orange County, where my district is and where my family and I live. But spending, the greater part of my adult life working with children, predominantly who came from Puerto Rico, but not necessarily only Puerto Rico, other parts of Latin America, and having family in Puerto Rico, both uncles, aunts, grandparents, my wife's family in Puerto Rico. When Maria hit, it was a very devastating thing for us personally, and as an elected official and as families, we want to do everything we could to help. Because we have such a connection with the island of Puerto Rico, now being the largest, the area outside of Puerto Rico with the largest amount of Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico, there was that relationship that we had not just myself as an elected official, but we had other elected officials who were speaking daily with our governor to make sure that the right things were being done to help Puerto Ricans both on the island and Puerto Ricans who were coming to Orlando or anywhere else in the state of Florida. My wife and I had an opportunity to go to Puerto Rico 7 days after Maria hit. We were part of a small group of, what was very interesting, a small group of Puerto Ricans who were now living in Florida, who were deputy sheriffs, first responders, paramedics, firefighters, former military, who all came together as part of a private group to go there and lend support and aid as much as we could. And it was a very, very tough situation to be a part of. Very tough to be there and see the devastation, to see that, what it was like for people on a daily basis, especially so soon after the hurricane. Something that has impacted our lives tremendously and has changed us from that point on. But much like here in the state of New York, our state government has worked diligently in conjunction with Puerto Rico's government to provide as much aid as possible. For the Puerto Ricans that were coming into the state of Florida, we created 3 receiving centers, one at the airport of Orlando, one at the airport of Miami, and one at the port of Miami. And our governor also, as we started to realize some of the needs of the Puerto Ricans that were coming in, we wanted to identify how we could best phase them into our cities. So if we had nurses coming in, if we had doctors, if we had teachers, we started to realize what were the barriers for them to get jobs. So we started to eliminate fees for licensing, eliminate certain certifications that were needed, and just honor the ones that came from Puerto Rico, or give them a certain period of time where they could start getting into a job, and then eventually, with more time, get the certification that was needed. We wanted to make sure that we could integrate them in the most positive way possible, whether or not they wanted to come here and stay for 6 months until their electricity came back, or until they were able to rebuild their homes, or if they wanted to stay here permanently, or in some instances, if we would serve as a bridge between other cities who were looking to bring more Puerto Ricans into their area. But one of the things that was most fascinating to me was, well, 2 things. First, how much people cared. How much people cared all over the country. There were people that were reaching out. I had the benefit of being married to an executive director of a nonprofit. My wife, Marucci Guzman, is here right now, and she presented this morning. But because of that, I was able to see what the nonprofit world is able to do to help people, and not just from my position as an elected official. But seeing that, I was able to hear the stories of all of the organizations and all of the individual people, whether it was from DC or Philadelphia or Ohio or Texas, that were reaching out to her organization or other similar organizations, asking how they could help, saying that they had jobs available if anyone needed jobs. We had one organization that said that they had jobs available and that they had money available to pay for housing for a certain amount of time, so that they can get their feet underneath them, so that they can begin to successfully be able to pay bills and pay housing. There's a lot that still needs to be done. One of the things that we talk about is this is only the beginning. The work that needs to be done will be 5, 10, or 15 years down the road, not just on the island, but anywhere that we have Puerto Ricans moving in the mainland part of the United States.
Thank you, Representative. And one thing I would like the audience to think about as we shift after introductions into an open dialogue, each representative, Assemblyman representative thus far have talked about collaborative approaches to rebuilding Puerto Rico. And how do we sustain such collaborative efforts in the long run? You know, obviously what occurred in Puerto Rico, the natural disaster, it's a reactive approach to what occurred. But how can we sustain this collaborative effort to be proactive in the future to ensure that we have a long-term pipeline with our respective states and more broadly the diaspora with Puerto Rico? So that's something we should think about, and the elected officials here could perhaps chime in later on how we sustain such a long-term relationship. With that, I do want to mix it up because we have now been joined by Lydia Valencia, the President and CEO of the Puerto Rican Congress of New Jersey. Lydia, welcome. Let's give her a round of applause.
And I apologize for being late, but it took me like 2.5 hours to get here. I could have gone to Puerto Rico in shorter time.
Do you mind just brief remarks on,
okay.
on your work in New Jersey with the Puerto Rican Congress, and what have you seen in the last 6 months?
Well, it's been a very busy last 6 months. I believe that for all of us it has been. And I believe it's going to be a very busy next few years for the work that we need to do for Puerto Rico and for the Puerto Ricans that now are residing on the mainland. In New Jersey, in much anticipation and because of the exodus of Puerto Ricans towards the mainland because of the economic crisis, the New Jersey Puerto Rican Congress had begun to take a look at what was happening in New Jersey. And in 2015, in November, we celebrated the first ever bipartisan meeting of New Jersey Puerto Rican elected officials. And we did that at the League of Municipalities meeting in New Jersey. Shortly after that, we also planned a convention. We reconvened. For many years, we celebrated a convention. We've been a 48-year-old organization in New Jersey, and it's statewide. And we used to celebrate conventions and to have a dialogue with our community. For many years, we ceased doing that because it had turned out into a party-type scenario. And we decided we needed to focus on certain other things. But then taking a look at what was transpiring in New Jersey, we decided we need to reconvene. And we were planning our convention again, and in we had the date set for September 30th, 2017. Well, September 20th, 2017, we know what happened in Puerto Rico. In the convention, we had well over 300 delegates that came to our convention. We had asked the Centro to produce for us a report, data profile of our Puerto Rican community in New Jersey, which they did. We formally introduced that to the 2 gubernatorial candidates that were running for governorship in New Jersey. We asked them to please then attend the convention and address our issues that were presented in that report to them. Both candidates did come and they both addressed what they thought could be done, and then facing the catastrophe, not only a devastation, but it's been a catastrophic event in Puerto Rico, as we all know, what they could do for Puerto Rico and for Puerto Ricans in New Jersey. So that kicked off a mass amount of work. As we all know, Governor Murphy won the election. Soon thereafter, in December the 15th, he formed a delegation of leadership that he felt he wanted to travel to Puerto Rico with. And we did go to Puerto Rico, and it was only a one-day event. I met with Governor Rosselló and other officials on the island, and we went and quickly took a look at the devastation. I personally had been to Puerto Rico in October and November prior to December as well, just to see how horrible the island has been affected with this hurricane. I can still talk about it and not get emotional about it because it is so devastating. As a child, I remember Puerto Rico before, and I'm very old, in the 1950s. And even in the 1950s, Puerto Rico doesn't compare to what, Puerto Rico was poor at that point before Operation Bootstrap. It was an agricultural island, but it wasn't devastated. It wasn't depressed. It wasn't, it's not what it is now. So we have a lot of work to do. So following that, in January of this year, the governor formed a commission of New Jersey and named 18 commissioners. I was fortunate enough to be named on the commission as well. And the mandate has been to take a look at Puerto Ricans in New Jersey and Puerto Rico and what can New Jersey do to alleviate the situation. We've just finalized the report. We wanted this done before May the 17th. I'm happy to say we did, and it's finalized. It will be presented to both Governor Rosselló and Governor Murphy on Thursday, the 17th. What we've been able to accomplish, I think, though, more, and this has been very specific, is that through our efforts of organizing our elected officials in New Jersey, we were ahead of the game because they were already talking to one another. They were already engaged in the conversation of, we have a community that we have, and I term it as, we sometimes call it ay bendito, if we forget about ourselves. And we had lent our community to the immigration issue. And that's all well and fine. I'm not being divisive in any way, shape, or form. That's a very important issue that we should be engaged in. But we need to now and before focus on what our community needed and should be addressed. Because then we can sit and negotiate with the other communities. We certainly will help in their agenda, but we need their help with our agenda as well. So that's a two-way street, and we have to build those pathways, and I think we had forgotten about our Puerto Rican community. We all felt very safe and secure that we were all doing very well, and everything was all that good, and it wasn't. It truly was not. So what we've been able to do is take a good look. We've been able to take a look at Florida, and we realized that Florida is the only state that is a host state for FEMA. And that gives quite a bit of advantages for the state and for Puerto Rico as well. Because as I believe, when FEMA helps the host state, there's no reimbursement to FEMA. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're from Florida. And I believe no other state has taken advantage of that opportunity. So New Jersey now is looking at it, we're recommending to the governor to look into making New Jersey a host state. Because unfortunately, we all know hurricane season is going to begin in about 3 or 4 weeks. And we don't need a hurricane in Puerto Rico. A storm will devastate Puerto Rico one more time. So we need to be as prepared as we can be at this point in time. We've been able to have the elected officials do 2 very important initiatives that we feel were necessary. And because in New Jersey we have 3 Puerto Rican senators, very proud to say female, and 3 assemblywomen, and I'm very proud to say females. They were right up, stepping up to the plate, and I'm not saying the males wouldn't have done the same, but it's good to know that we have good female leadership out there. And in the Senate, Senate Bill S-1914 was submitted, and that is, and it's been passed in the Senate, and it has an identical bill in the Assembly, where it would prohibit state pension and annuity funds to be invested in entities that engage in mortgage foreclosures during periods of mortgage moratoriums that are presidentially declared as a major disaster. So those entities that have been not wanting to engage in the mortgage moratorium, we would not invest any of the state pension monies and or annuities. And there is the 2 bills also, because in New Jersey we have reciprocity for licenses and certificates for occupational professionals, etc., teachers, doctors, nurses. But the legislation only mentioned the 50 states. So there are bills now that are in the Assembly and the Senate expanding the definition of reciprocity to include Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands as well. So we've been able to get traction in what we're doing. And we've also were able to get the Department of Community Affairs to share their propriety rights to the what they call the Sandy Recovery Operations and Management System. It is the management system that was utilized by New Jersey in order to report CDBG monies that were provided to New Jersey federal funding. This is going to save Puerto Rico millions of dollars by them sharing their proprietary rights. We've had the desire of both the Department of Environmental Protection of New Jersey and the Department of the New Jersey Department of Agriculture to agree to provide any technical assistance that Puerto Rico might need in regards to landfills, recycling, agriculture, throughout even engaging Rutgers University with the University of Puerto Rico. So those things and those systems are in the works at this point in time. I think I was asked that where do we go from here? I think we need to go national. We need to start speaking to one another, especially those states that have significant amounts of Puerto Ricans, and notwithstanding any state that has a Puerto Rican community. We need to engage in a national conversation. We need a national voice, because if we're going to be able to fix Puerto Rico, the only people that can do that, in my viewpoint, are those that are sitting in this room, are those that are in the mainland. We know that in this world, it's money or numbers. Well, we're numbers. And if we exercise our right to vote, whichever way anybody wants to do that, that is very important, because then they'll need to address and treat us fairly and equitably with parity in our Medicaid, Medicare funding, in our disaster relief, and in all those areas that we need help in.
So a lot of great work happening in New Jersey. And finally, last but not least, Senator Rivera from right here in New York.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Gustavo Rivera. I was born and raised I was born in Santurce, raised in Bayamón. My parents are from a little town called Comerío. I've been in New York since 1998, moved up to the Bronx in 2000, and have been elected to the state senate since 2010. Now, I actually didn't travel that much back to Puerto Rico during the time that I've been here. My parents still lived there, I should say. They've now moved to Florida. They now live in Port St. Lucie, about 50 minutes where my brother lives. That was not a move that they wanted to make, but they had to make it. And we are lucky in that regard. We had somewhere to be. They were able to get a home. They are in a stable place, which is not the reality, as we know, for hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters who are out and about all over the place. Immediately after the storm, I did not travel to Puerto Rico on purpose. I had the opportunity to do it a few times, but I guessed correctly that at least as far as what I was able to bring to the table, it was best not to travel, because if the things that I was able to do, and I was telling the story, I've told the story before, if you were here at a Diaspora Summit before, you heard me talk briefly about a guy named Crazy Legs. Crazy Legs is one of the originators of breakdancing. Like, he's one of the original guys. I haven't got to meet him, by the way. I haven't met him in person yet. He's a dude from the Bronx, Puerto Rican, who immediately after the storm, when nobody could figure out how to land in the airport in Aguadilla, not only figured out how to get a friend of his to pay for a plane to land in the plane of Aguadilla, but brought a series of water filtration systems that then he went out, without speaking much Spanish, by the way, and he went out and figured out how to give it to people so they would be able to have clean water. And when I heard about that story, I figured out I'm not an idea guy. The idea guys are dudes like Crazy Legs. I'm a resource and relationship guy. So therefore, for a few months after the storm, the issue was, somebody said to me, and I'm connected to so many people during that period of time that heard my name somewhere. They would call me and be like, so I have some stuff I got to ship to Puerto Rico. And I'm like, let me figure out if I can get that on a plane for you. Well, I got somebody in the island needs medical evacuation. I was like, all right, let me figure out if I can get them on a plane. I got money I want to give to an organization. Let me figure out who can actually use it, that type of stuff. So for me, it was relationships and resources. But I finally traveled there about 2 months ago, right near the 6th-month anniversary. And it was both depressing and inspiring. It was depressing because as somebody who is part of government, I believe and know that government can actually play a positive role in people's lives, can actually change people's lives in a positive way. So to see government, whether it was the federal or the central government in Puerto Rico, fail so miserably was incredibly depressing. But it was inspiring at the same time, because then as I traveled around, I was there for 4 days. And in 4 days, I went to Humacao, Loíza, Ponce, Jayuya, Utuado, Comerío, and San Juan. And I talked to most of the mayors of all those towns, as well as visited with organizations, community-based organizations, mutual assistance societies, nonprofits that just got the shit done. And in many instances, literally kept people alive when they had no connection to the outside world. When the mayor of Loíza tells me, and I still can't, this is not something I can fathom. I'm not sure if there's anybody in this room who was in Puerto Rico during the storm. There were. So you folks can fathom this, I still can't. Mayor of Loíza tells me, there's 30,000 people who live in Loíza. Loíza has 3 roads that lead to it, and immediately after the storm, 2 of them were covered with water, 1 of them was covered with debris, sand, and trees. And for a period of 72 hours, there was absolutely, positively no connection to the outside world. There were no phones, no radio, no electricity, no water, nothing. And they had to just, as we say in Spanish, hacer de tripa corazón. They had to figure that shit out, and they did. And so it was inspiring to see those organizations that are, many of whom have been existing for generations. I mean, I went up to Macau, I sat with the current one of the co-directors of the Proyecto de Apoyo Mutuo de Mariana, in a mountain in Macau. Right. Or I didn't get to go to Casa Puebla, but I know about the work that they're doing there. And these are organizations that have existed for 20, 30 years, and they've been figuring it out. So as I come to the end here, because I want to make sure that I hear from you folks, this is the dilemma that I'm facing, and I don't know the answer to this. And I know that there's a lot of brain power in this room and in this diaspora and just this community as a whole. The issue that we have is one of governance. There's a fundamental thing that has not been said yet and needs to be said. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States of America. And sadly, that if you think about government, one of the most fundamental, if not the most fundamental thing that government is supposed to do is to keep people safe, to provide them basic safety. They failed miserably. Whether it was ineptitude in some cases, whether it was just somebody that didn't know what to do with what they were doing, or whether it was racism, and I certainly point to the national administration to say that it was a racist response or lack thereof. So we have those institutions that are supposed to serve us failed so miserably in the middle of a crisis where they're supposed to hold it together. And the organizations that did hold it together are not the ones that we are looking at right now to get resources to. And so my thing is, I am incredibly troubled by the fact that it's, as I said, it was inspiring and depressing, because I was like looking at these organizations, I'm like, I just need to give you more stuff. I need to give you more resources so you can augment the work that you're doing in Macau or in Loíza or Utuado. Like, anybody ever been to Utuado? Right? I had never been to Utuado. And we're talking about like, yo, eso son montañas pero verdad. I hadn't seen that. And my first one was Comerío, and I hadn't seen freaking mountains like that. And then we had an organization who was like, we went into their, they still didn't have electricity when I went. And we went to their little office, they turn on the thing, they turn on the fan, they turn on the air conditioner, turn on their computer. And it's like, no, we're solar powered. We got internet here. This is the place where all our community comes to pay their bills, so they don't have to go down the hill. We've made agreements with local banks so that they actually can come here and pay their bills and don't have to go all over the place. And it's like, and we can get internet here, and they can get this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, you need more resources to do this stuff, to make sure that here on top of the mountain, completely disconnected from government all over the place, you can still do what you're doing. So the concern, and this is where I'm going to end, I think there's an issue of governance here. We cannot ignore that even though the storm certainly was not man-made, it is arguably the size of the storm was. But what cannot be argued is that the aftermath was man-made. It was exacerbated by no la ignorancia, sino que nos ignoraron, right? Being ignored from the top, and then the ineptitude of the local government. So both of those things together means that now as we move on to reconstruction and rebuilding, and as we said already, some people said it, the storm is around the corner. The storm season is around the corner. But as we look not to this storm season, but to 2 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, what are the things that we need to do? What are some of the governance challenges that we have to face so that those organizations that already, they've figured it out, they have been figuring it out in communities all across the city, all across the country in Puerto Rico for generations. How do we empower them? Because if not, I fear that getting resources to the central government is I don't fear, I know that it'll be a complete loss of resources. And as little as we're going to get anywhere from the federal government, where are we going to waste that even? And I don't know the answer to this. I'm hoping that some of these conversations that we continue to have will bring us a little bit closer to it. Thank you for your impromptu invitation.
We discussed in part where we are. Each of us in this room have, in one way, shape, or form, been actively engaged in the diaspora. If you're not, you will be today and moving forward. But we talked about, Senator Rivera just touched upon it, engaging and mobilizing organizations. But we also need to engage and mobilize our elected officials, which is why we're here today for this particular panel. How do we engage elected officials, Boricua, Latino, or non, to push agendas that benefit the people of Puerto Rico? I've been in politics for the last 10 years and I work for a U.S. Senator. I know, and being a member of the National Puerto Rican Agenda, I know we have Boricua and Latino elected officials across this nation. But what I see, and it's no criticism to anyone here, is that we tend to work in silos. How can we bridge what Assemblyman Crespo is doing in New York with what the Representative Plasencia is doing in Florida? How can we bridge that relationship to ensure we are taking this beyond Florida, beyond New York, and we're working together for a national agenda for Puerto Ricans? And I think that's one of the purposes or reasons why we are here today is how do we engage the elected officials? We have more Puerto Rican elected officials now perhaps than ever before across the nation. How can we bridge the gap? If it's through NALEO or national organizations, but how can we push an agenda using our elected officials for Puerto Rico? And that's a part of why this panel is here today. And I'm very animated with my arms, so I apologize if I'm all over the place, but I do want to engage the audience because we do have a good 20 minutes or so for conversation. I know in some other panel we were rushing for time, but I really want to engage you all. So using what I just said as a foundation, let's talk about how we do that. How do we engage elected officials? The folks in the panel can talk about best practices, what you have seen in your districts. But let's take this conversation and move forward on how we can engage our elected officials to push an agenda for Puerto Rico. This gentleman right here. Please be very brief with your questions or statements.
Paper or vote?
No, I don't like the cards. I like people talking, and so let's do it that way.
You have to
Very brief.
You have to mobilize from the bottom up. Okay? The people have to be inspired. They have to be organized. They have to be mobilized. That's something that the representative said. It's very important. That is that Puerto Ricans here in the United States are in part the key. One place they can start is that in 1984, Congress took the ability of Puerto Rico to apply for bankruptcy. We need to mobilize and make sure that they give it back to Puerto Rico to resolve this issue. And the other thing that hasn't been mentioned, we're talking about rebuilding, is that Puerto Rico can now be totally and fully rebuilt unless there are Puerto Ricans living, working, and worshiping in Puerto Rico. So part of this agenda is to get these Puerto Ricans, diaspora, the exiles back to Puerto Rico and to find the resources so that they can go back and build Puerto Rico.
Response to that, and then we'll take more questions. Representative?
Yeah, I guess my response is actually a question because I think that what we're saying here is that we've had a problem since Maria, but we've actually had a problem prior to Maria for decades. Even before Maria, I think our local newspaper came out with an article at some point prior to Maria, just in Orange County alone, just in Orange County, Florida, and Florida is a very large state. We had 105 Puerto Ricans get driver's licenses every single day for that year. That's 105 every single day in one county of the state of Florida. So we've had Puerto Ricans leaving Puerto Rico prior to Maria. What I would tell people would always ask, well, how many do you think will stay in Florida? And what I would always tell them is they were coming before Maria. This just accelerated their move. A lot of people in Puerto Rico were trying to figure out finances, wait till kids graduated from high school, whatever it may be to finally make the move to Florida, but they were going to make it eventually. What I see with the problem with Puerto Rico and rebuilding Puerto Rico is who will rebuild Puerto Rico? Because if they lose too many Puerto Ricans, especially your students, your college students, your young professionals, your accountants, your labor force, then who is going to rebuild Puerto Rico? So when we're talking about how to help Puerto Rico from the states, from our different positions in government, what's the goal? What do they need? And how can we help?
Yeah, please.
I firmly believe that that's where we need to mobilize. We have to mobilize from the bottom on up, and that question then will become an effect, cause and effect. If people have left, it's been because of the economics of the island. And I think that was triggered when Section 936 was eliminated. So we as the diaspora need to mobilize ourselves in order to afford Puerto Rico an opportunity to rebuild its economics. We need to rebuild it, reconstruct it, and build their economics. It's an awesome job to do, but it's one that we must do, because if not, Puerto Rico's population is going to contract to the 2.8, and from what I read, if that happens, Puerto Rico will never recover. So we need for the population to maintain itself in Puerto Rico. It's not that we don't want them here, it's that we don't want to lose our island as well.
But there,
So that being said, we need to mobilize and we need to have a concerted effort nationally and have that voice and have that foot soldiers out there as well, because you can't have generals without an
So
army.
Lydia, how do we do that?
How
And
do
then,
we do that? I
Senator,
think-
you're next. How do we do
Not
that?
because I'm a member of the National Puerto Rican Agenda, but I really believe that that definitely is a vehicle by which we can start to organize. We haven't had, and I was a member of the National Puerto Rican Coalition, and I was devastated, and I was president of that board in 2008, and then shortly thereafter, it shut down. So we need that national organization. We don't have that organization, and we need to strengthen. We have it now, so we need to strengthen it. And understanding that we're going to have dissensions. We're not all going to be on the same page, but we need to understand that we can't throw out. I quote that. Can't throw out the baby with the water. So we need to forget the status question. We're all going to
no,
have.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you. We have to deal with the root cause, folks. We have to deal with the root cause, and that is the decolonization of Puerto Rico.
I'm not too sure that that's going to be the most beneficial route at this point. There will be a time when we need to discuss this status question, but right now we have a catastrophe. We cannot, I don't believe we have the energies to do the two things at one point.
Ma'am, I'm going
And
to respectfully
So
disagree
that's
with
okay,
you
because that's what democracy is all
and
about.
strongly do
That's why we have
so,
a panel.
and strongly do so for this very basic reason. This kicking the can down the road type of situation, right? We're saying, like, yes, we're dealing with a disaster, but the parameters of the disaster were, as I said earlier, and if anybody wants to debate me on this, they can more than debate me, but the parameters of the disaster, the fact that it was made so much worse was because of the colonial situation of Puerto Rico. We have an impotent government in Puerto Rico that doesn't really have the capacity to do anything. If we ignore the status question, I understand that it is one of the most fundamental things. It has taken me many, many years dealing with this since I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. The only thing that when I was studying political science down there, anytime that I stepped outside of the classroom, talking about political science, talking about Machiavelli, and talk about this, whenever we talk about politics out in the world in Puerto Rico, it was only that was it. But we cannot ignore the fact that the current situation that we find ourselves in has been exacerbated by the colonial situation in Puerto Rico, and we cannot ignore that. And if we do, it would be to our peril, because when we go down the road, whether we talk about economics, whether we talk about healthcare system, whether we talk about infrastructure, whether we talk about transportation, whether we talk about education, each and every one of these things has been exacerbated by the fact that we are a colony of the United States.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't think,
Assemblyman is going, Crespo is going to respond, and
I'll rush this through, but I don't think it's necessary to disagree completely, because you're both right, and to this extent, though, we also have to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish here, and who are we in this equation. When you talk about Puerto Rico's future and rebuilding it, I will not go as far as to suggest that Puerto Rico has no future, even with the loss of population. I will tell you that so long as 2 Puerto Ricans stand on the island, they will rebuild. Now, that may be a very poetic view, but what I'm trying to say is this: we have to be careful of sort of speaking down to our very own that we're trying to defend, as if they don't know what they're doing on the island. I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about people. So there are organizations, there are not-for-profits, there are advocates, there are youth that have been really mobilizing in this era of mobilization to say, we have ideas, let us work with them. Now, you're right, there's lack of resources in order to execute a lot of that. We could play a role with that, but who are we in this room? The majority of us are the diaspora. Those that, for whatever reasons, do not reside full-time in Puerto Rico, reside in our various states, and have certain roles to play here. What I mean by that is, I agree with you in the sense that our focus as a diaspora is what do we have in front of us to do? You're right, we have the long-term issue of Puerto Rico's status. But if we can't even get the federal government to send federal assistance in the midst of the emergency, do you think we can push them enough to get a real plebiscito, to have a definitive answer to the question? We don't have their cooperation. We have half of Congress who didn't even know before Maria that we're American citizens. So we have taken such a step back in the lack of organizing as a diaspora that we have lost the strength to drive the agenda. And I think I agree that the National Puerto Rican Agenda, or the work that, for example, Somos has done here in New York, where we've had an active presence bringing electeds to Puerto Rico to keep talking about the conditions. We're looking to expand that to make it more of a diaspora gathering while we're there. But we have to start connecting to one another. And by the way, let's be real about it. Because we disagree on the status question, we have allowed ourselves to separate because we can't agree on that and forget that there is a shared agenda. And if we focus on the shared agenda, we may have accomplished things that impact people like our family members who are there. The Medicaid issue, for example, has nothing to do right now with the future of the status. It is an immediate thing that the federal government could have resolved, but we can't even get our coalition together enough to demand it. So we have to own up to what is our shortcoming as a diaspora. We have not been able to exert strength. How do we do that? We have to organize the grassroots. We have to communicate as elected officials. We have to be in unison, one voice, what it is that we're asking for. Porque si nos ven confundidos y todo el mundo jalando para diferentes lados, no vamos a llegar a nada. Y saben que estamos en esa. So I think you're both right, but I think the immediate step for us as a diaspora is to begin to coalesce. And if we disagree on something, it shouldn't mean that we can't sit in the same room and at least focus on the things that we do and accomplish something for the people of Puerto Rico. And as that takes momentum, we can start to address those bigger problems.
And thank you. And it's a good segue because again, I'm going to keep bringing it back to why we are here, which is engaging elected officials. And I don't care what agenda you push. You can't push any agenda unless you have political capital in Washington. So we need to figure out a way to mobilize the elected officials throughout the nation, throughout the diaspora, to move whatever policy agenda we decide on, but we need that capital. The gentleman with the glasses right here, and then I have Dr. Melendez and Gretchen.
Thank you all for those experiences that you're sharing with us. We are here to engage elected officials. Who and how? I know that the who we elect and who we engage and how depends on the what. What are we engaging you for? Obviously, you are here, we're engaging you. But in terms of
Great question.
funding, if we want parity funding, who do we elect? I mean, who do we engage? And how do we engage the person to give us parity when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, or what have you? Who do we engage in order to make sure that HUD releases funds for the rebuilding of housing in Puerto Rico? Who do we engage to make sure that FEMA does what it has to do for Puerto Rico? And how do we do it?
Look, when we had that experience with the healthcare issue, for example, and some of us who didn't know, I don't really interact with my federal officials on their issues. I'm so focused on New York State. But when this happened, the first call I made was Senator Schumer's office and Senator Gillibrand's office. And I said, who is it amongst your colleagues we need to be visiting? So when we did that mobilization, there was groups came from all over the country to do advocacy meetings and visits to congressional offices. We were given a script and we were given very targeted members based on what committees they sat. So it depends on the issue, depends on the time. But in order to get that coordination, we need viable organizations that are credible, that can organize that information and that we could all trust. Cuando el profesor Melendez me manda algo, yo no tengo que preguntarme, what is his motivation? Yo sé that it's an academic document that is focused on real policy concerns without any biases. When Hispanic Federation gives me some guidance, I know they're doing things in a constructive way because I have that relationship with those groups. So we need to organize an organization, and whether it's the National Puerto Rican Agenda that can dissect those things, identify the issues, and give targeted efforts. Respectively in each of our states, we need to look at bipartisan support. We can't just keep going to our own and demanding that they do what we know we already have them on our side for. Si alguien viene a hablarme a mí de Puerto Rico, está perdiendo su tiempo. Que vayan y le hablen a un republicano que no sabe nada de Puerto Rico, vamos a ganarnos un aliado nuevo. And there are Republicans in our state, that's the dynamic. In other states, there's more bipartisanship, is more common. You have elected officials on the other side of the aisle that are Puerto Ricans, we don't. But we need to build that. We can't just keep operating in a silo. And this is not about being Democrats or Republicans. This is about being Puerto Ricans and wanting to help Puerto Rico, and everybody has to be at the table. And I also agree that we also have to target our allies, Latino allies in other communities, whether it's La Raza or whatever they're called now, or the other organizations. Our issues have to be their agenda as well. There have been Puerto Rican officials who have championed the issue of immigration. My father was an undocumented immigrant from Peru. I didn't have that problem because I was born in Puerto Rico. But I know that issue very well, and so we all need to be at the table. And I want to hear our Mexican-American elected officials talk about Puerto Rico on the congressional floor.
That's a good point, Mr. Crespo. And I'm going to ask, I do have a few questions. I have notes on who to select. I have a queue. But I want to ask Representative Valencia to respond, because I believe you are a member of the Republican Party in Florida, and you're a state representative. So bipartisanship, what do you see on your side? What is the Republican Party, the party in which you are a member of, what do you need to see on your side to help move this dialogue forward?
Before I answer that, I want to just touch on something that Assemblyman Crespo said. He said that until Maria, most Americans had no clue that Puerto Ricans were American citizens. And I think there's a point to be made there, and I think there's a very good lesson to be learned from that, that unless we are at the forefront of the conversation at the dinner table, on the news, in the media, we will be forgotten. And my wife and I would talk about it all the time, that the moment that the news media stopped talking about Hurricane Maria was the moment that we would stop receiving aid in Puerto Rico for the recovery process. And so what's important in engaging with your elected officials is not to stop engaging and not to stop the frequency of engagement, not to stop the engagement with your media as well, to ask them, what have you been doing about, what have you been reporting about the crisis in Puerto Rico? It's not over. We need you to be vigilant and constant in your vigilance. If not, then we're going to get drowned out in the 24-hour news cycle. In the question on what can we do as Republicans, I guess that's twofold. You have national and you have local. In our state, I'll tell you a story. It's a little disheartening. We have 3 Republican, myself included, state legislators. We have a supermajority Republican in the House and the Senate, and we have a Republican governor. Our governor has been phenomenal. Our governor for Puerto Ricans, at the very least, the ones that are in Florida, is a hero, because he has worked day and night to make sure that he can do everything within his power to help the people on the island of Puerto Rico and the people who have come from Puerto Rico to the state of Florida. But on the other side, while myself and Representative Bob Cortez were working every single day, I was on the phone with the governor's office 5 times a day for at least 2 months straight, because that's how pressing it was to us. And Representative Bob Cortez did the same thing. He's 2 districts down from me, a Republican Puerto Rican. But I got a phone call from Representative David Santiago, another Republican Puerto Rican, and he said, look, I just want to give you a heads up. A couple of the guys in the members hall came up to me and said, hey, why are Coach P and Bob trying so hard to get Puerto Ricans to come to Florida? You know, we're gonna lose our next election. And so they didn't come and say it to me because they knew it wouldn't end very well for them. But those were the conversations that were being had behind closed doors. And they're not going to say it to the media, and they're not going to say it in public. But if those are the conversations that Republicans are having in your state legislature or in the halls of DC, then we're in trouble. So not sure which one you want me to touch on, but we do have some ground to make in order to educate people on who we are and really what we represent for this country. The biggest thing that our governor knew that the more Puerto Ricans that came to Florida, the better our state would be. So our governor brought them in with open arms because it was talent. Some of the best talent in the world comes from the island of Puerto Rico. And he knows that if we have them in the state of Florida, that our state will be better off for it. And we need to make sure that people all over this country understand the talent that comes from our island and what it will mean to their communities. But for us, we know that we want to keep that talent as much as we can on the island of Puerto Rico, or else. Yeah.
This young man, and I know I do have a few individuals on my list, but some of you are very active in this conversation. Others are very new, or at least to me are new. So I'm going to try to mix it up. So I know I have Dr. Melendez and Gretchen, but I have this gentleman right here, young man with the glasses. So I'm going to ask for you to say a few words. I want to mix it up. And I have the gentleman in the back with a hat, and then I'll end it with Melendez and Gretchen, okay? We got 5 minutes.
Give me like heart palpitations. There's a recurring theme in this conversation about how we talk to our elected officials, but I mean, for a lot of us, like I grew up in Chelsea, all my elected officials are white. None of them are Latino, none of them are Puerto Rican. So how do I convince Congressman Nadler that Puerto Rico should be at the top of his agenda? It's just because like he doesn't have a shared identity with me in that sense of ethnicity or a sense of place or sense of heritage. And going on that point too, even if he did, we do have those people in Congress right now, or that are, or even in Senate. Like Marco Rubio was the one that got the plebiscite in his hands and said to Governor Rosell, like, you know what, it's going to be too hard to convince Republicans that Puerto Ricans are American citizens, so let's kick this down the road. And it was ironic because it was on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and like, you know, in the I Have a Dream speech, he's like, we need to stop being okay with, we need to really give the sense of fierce urgency of now and stop being okay with people saying there's a later date that we can solve this. Because if that conversation happened and he was like, you know what, time's now to gather our Senate and convince Puerto Ricans are American citizens, maybe by the time the hurricane hit, people would have been more educated and more ready to actually assist. And some agencies would have changed their logic and how they appropriate funds. So I really agree with Senator Rivera right now. It's a dual question. What I have is, one, we do need to see the fact that our elected officials are not us in the majority of the country. How do we convince them that we are them? And two, when is an appropriate time and how is an appropriate time to address our federal constraints like the Jones Act or the status issue?
So, let me do the first part.
Very brief, so I do want to squeeze in two more questions, so very brief.
Only because consistency is one, and second, even on the immigration issue, for example, with DREAM Act in New York State, I no longer attempt to convince my colleagues on the moral reasons why they should support the immigrant community. I try to educate them on where I think they'll care, which is the economics of it. So you got to find an angle, right? And so if the growth in the Puerto Rican community in Florida, or even in our neighborhood, is going to change their political reality, they're going to care about the issue. In your case, you have a representative who may not be Puerto Rican. It may be hard to find that common ground, but he is surrounded by a strong delegation who's going to talk to him as well and say, we're counting on you for this. And therefore, you're in a better position than somebody who's in a more isolated state or neighborhood. But consistently outreaching them, reorganizing a group of people to come with you so that they know it's not just one young man who has a concern, but rather a growing group of people who are voicing this issue. And so consistently hammering that message and then finding an angle to where it should matter to him, or her, right? So what impact is this going to have on the economy? What impact is it going to have on the district makeup? How is this going to change redistricting 10 years from now? And how does that mean? What does that mean to you? So you got to find an angle to how you get to them. But consistency is key in terms of getting to your elected. Social media is good because you can't avoid that. You're tagging them, they're seeing it. And so, you know, there's different ways of getting them to do that.
Lydia?
I'm going to quote a saying from an individual that I don't necessarily impart much admiration to, but Fidel Castro used to say, de la derrota hacer una victoria. So we have a catastrophe, and we have an opportunity now to come together and make our presence felt and educate everyone. And we have to be consistent. We never need to be afraid to work with other groups as well, because we're going to need everyone's help. Many people know, and everybody in New Jersey knows, that I'm a Republican, and I work with everyone. I've had the good fortune of building a very good relationship with this newly elected governor. Why? Because you need to have that conversation. Politics should not be a barrier. We need to know how to work with everyone, and it has to be across the aisles. I made sure that I made my phone calls to my fellow Republicans, telling them and as a matter of fact, the sponsors of the bill for the reciprocity on the Senate side are Republican senators, non-Hispanic. So we need to bridge those gaps, and we need to have those conversations consistently and constantly with everyone. Consistency is key.
Thank you. So I'm getting the call. We have to wrap up. So we have 5 minutes, 2 questions. I'm going to ask the gentleman in the orange hat, and then Dr. Melendez, you had a comment, and then if we have time, depending on how long Dr. Melendez's progression. Gentlemen, yes, right here.
I'm in New York, and I'm now in Puerto Rico trying to build a satellite communications business to prepare Puerto Rico for the next storm. One of the things that I see in the island is that there's so much political fighting, trying to determine right now who's going to manage the federal dollars that are coming in, to the point that some of those dollars could be delayed. Some of you mentioned that you would like to see private groups that have some ideas. And I think that's the right way to go. But the local government or FEMA or different power, even the junta, is trying to manage that money. We cannot be certain that that money is going to go to the right places. So this group, and we as the diaspora, could use, like Lydia said, the agenda, the National Congress of Hispanic State Legislature, which is controlled by Puerto Ricans, could put some pressure in Washington, not only at the legislative level, because at this point, the level where pressure has to be put on is on the agencies, where they're creating the statutes of how that money is going to be distributed. And in my industry, the telecommunications industry, $750 million is going, the way it's planned to be spent, is being spent in a system that 95% failed. And if we don't come in with new ideas, and this group supports new ideas that these local groups are developing, okay, and make sure that the voices are heard, not only in the legislative bodies, but also in the agencies themselves, then nothing is going to happen. The situation is very, very difficult right now, unless we start putting some of our pressure in the right place.
It's a great point, and it goes back to what Mr. Crespo said earlier, which is a collaborative approach. Dr. Melendez, and then final comments from the panel.
Well, thank you all for this lively conversation. When we put this panel together, we made sure that they were represented from both the Democratic and the Republican side on purpose, right? We need to transcend that political partisanship. So my point is that there are 3 delegations that have the most Puerto Rican elected officials. There are about 140 give and take, and then it's New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut in that order. And then about a little less than that, Florida with 6 state level and maybe another 5 or 6 at the county, et cetera, level. So, and then everybody else is Massachusetts, everybody else is 5 or 6, give and take. So my point is that if we can get an agreement between the big players of the elected officials group, you have with 3 delegations, you have more than half of them. And if you add Florida, then you have the 2 states that are, Florida may have 6 now, but Florida may have many more in the upcoming elections. We know that. So if you guys were to agree on a strategy, which I advanced to you, that might be that someone organizes an annual conference there. The Congreso takes a delegation every year. Why can't we agree on do one day of commonality where A, we don't talk about the status, and B, we don't invite politicians from Puerto Rico to talk about the status. that would be my only condition to have a coalition. Why? Because we tried the caucus of elected officials and it didn't work. It was corrupted by something that was too associated with a particular political ideological view, and then people walk away. So the issue is not whether we like to converge in the middle. The issue is that if you don't converge in the middle, you don't have anything to organize, because people are going to walk away with their votes or their participation. So is it possible to come up, maybe? I hope this year we can start, but is it possible? I'm asking the leadership of those delegations, especially in New Jersey and so in New York, and I'm sure we have perhaps the most younger, influential Republican state politician from Florida here in the panel. Can we come up with one thing that will unite elected officials moving forward for Puerto Rico? If we cannot get you guys to agree on that one thing.
And to add to that, in the spirit of bipartisanship, I would like to hear a commitment before we leave from Assemblyman Crespo, Representative Valencia, Senator Rivera. Can we continue this conversation and working together to touch upon what Edwin just said, beyond the diaspora, in conversations in the next weeks and months to come?
3 words for you, Edwin. Sí se puede. And by the way, and you and I have had this conversation, and it's something that I, want to bring some of the members who have been very active with Somos, to talk to each of the delegations, visit your states and talk to your members. Because we've already been planning for this conference. We've been talking about, for the Somos conference, to open up into more of a diaspora gathering. Now the dates and the reasons, the specific reasons why we coordinate the way we do, which is something we would have to work around. But I agree 100%, Edwin. There has to be a place for the diaspora to go to Puerto Rico and reconnect and really understand. Because another mistake that we make is to assume that we know, to assume that we know enough, to assume that we've heard enough. And so, again, we have to keep in mind quiénes somos, de dónde venimos y qué estamos tratando de hacer. Si somos la diáspora, tenemos que operar como una diáspora. Si el caballero regresó a Puerto Rico para establecer un negocio, he's reconnecting in a unique and different way. And so we have to have a place in those conversations, and I agree. I don't disagree with the issue that we have to get a resolution to status or resolve what the future of that looks like. But I refuse to allow that to hinder movement and progress and coordination on the other things that are currently affecting the people who reside in Puerto Rico and the diaspora. So Somos is open for that. And matter of fact, in advance of that, I've already secured a different block of rooms in case I can get members from the other states to come out. So we are accommodating, we're preparing for you.
The other part,
and hope, I'm in.
The other part of the equation is Representative Valencia. So, sir?
So I actually attended Somos 2 years ago. I think I was the first Floridian other than Tony Suarez. I don't know if Tony counts.
And speaker.
And
Not just- he
speaker,
wasn't
yeah,
just
that's
there,
right.
he was a presenter.
I was on a panel at Somos. Absolutely. Like the whole time here, I've just been waiting for it to end because I want to go behind closed doors with him and say, hey, how can we work together? Let's come to Florida, bring a delegation with you. We'll come to New York. We'll go to Puerto Rico. But, I'm a doer. You get a lot done, not in your state capital. You get a lot done back in your community, working with other people who are like-minded, who have common interests. And I'm very anxious. So for me, I always want to do things yesterday instead of tomorrow. So I look forward to be able to work with you guys here and do what we can to help Puerto Ricans on the island and help Puerto Ricans in our states.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give one more round of applause to Lydia.